The winter wind howled through the Colorado mountains as Eliza stepped down from the stagecoach, her heavy woolen cloak wrapped tightly around her expectant form. At 27, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of a woman who had learned to face hardship without complaint. The leather satchel in her hand contained everything she owned, and the letter from James Whitmore had promised work as a cook in exchange for room and board through the harsh mountain winter. The stagecoach. Driver handed down her worn trunk, his expression sympathetic. "You sure about this, ma'am? Whitmore's cabin is another 2 miles up that trail, and he's not known for his social graces." Eliza placed her hand protectively over her growing belly, where her child moved restlessly, as if sensing her nervousness. "I'm sure. Mr. Whitmore is expecting me." What the driver hadn't mentioned was that James Whitmore was expecting a cook, not a pregnant widow whose husband had died in a mining accident 3 months earlier. Eliza had answered his advertisement through an agency, carefully omitting details about her condition out of desperation for winter shelter. The snow crunched beneath her boots as she made her way up the mountain path, her trunk dragging behind her through the white drifts. The cabin that came into view was larger than she had expected, built of solid logs with smoke curling from a stone chimney. Behind it, she could see a barn and corral where several horses stood with their backs to the wind. Before she could knock, the door opened to reveal a man in his early 30s with dark hair and a beard that spoke of months without town visits. His blue coat was well made but practical, and his expression shifted from expectation to confusion as he took in her appearance. "I'm looking for James Whitmore," Eliza said, trying to keep her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "That's me. And you are?" "Eliza Carson. I answered your advertisement for a cook." James stared at her, clearly struggling to reconcile the pregnant woman before him with his expectations. "Mrs. Carson, there seems to be some misunderstanding. I was expecting someone who could handle the physical demands of cooking for a working ranch." Eliza felt her heart sink, but she straightened her shoulders. "Mr. Whitmore, I can cook, clean, and manage a household. My condition doesn't prevent me from working." "Your condition," James repeated, his voice carrying a mix of frustration and something that might have been concern. "Ma'am, you're clearly expecting a child. When is the baby due?" "Early spring. I have 3 months to prove my worth to you." James ran his hand through his hair, looking out at the darkening sky. The nearest town was a day's ride away, and the weather was turning worse. Whatever his reservations about the situation, he couldn't send a pregnant woman back into the storm. "Come inside before you freeze," he said gruffly, taking her trunk despite his apparent reluctance. The cabin's interior was spartanly furnished but clean, with a large stone fireplace providing warmth and light. Eliza noticed immediately that while the space was functional, it lacked any softness or comfort beyond the basic necessities. "I should tell you," James said, setting her trunk by the door, "I live alone up here by choice. I'm not accustomed to conversation or company." Eliza studied his face, seeing wariness rather than cruelty. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm not here to intrude on your solitude. I'm here to work. If you'll give me a chance, I'll earn my keep." James was quiet for a long moment, clearly debating whether to honor their agreement or send her away at first light. "The spare room is through that door. We'll discuss the arrangement in the morning." Over the following days, Eliza proved her capabilities despite James's skeptical observation. She rose before dawn to prepare hearty breakfasts, kept the cabin spotlessly clean, and produced dinners that transformed James's usual solitary meals into something approaching civilization. But more than her cooking skills, it was her quiet presence that began to change the atmosphere of the isolated cabin. She hummed softly while she worked, arranged wildflowers she found preserved under the snow, and gradually brought warmth to spaces that had known only function. "Mrs. Carson," James said one evening as she served a stew that filled the cabin, with aromatic comfort, "you mentioned your husband died in a mining accident." Eliza nodded, her hand moving instinctively to her belly. Thomas was a good man. He was working extra shifts to save money for the baby when the mine collapsed. I'm sorry for your loss. That must have been difficult. It was. But dwelling on what we've lost doesn't honor what we've been given. She looked around the cabin, now softened with small touches that made it feel like a home. I've learned that grace isn't about avoiding hardship. It's about finding meaning in how we respond to it. James had been avoiding personal conversations, but something in her tone made him look up from his meal. You speak as if you've had practice with hardship. We all have, haven't we? The question is whether we let it make us bitter or teach us compassion. As the weeks passed, James found himself looking forward to their evening meals, not just for the food, but for the gentle wisdom Eliza shared without preaching. She spoke of finding beauty in small moments, of gratitude, even in difficulty, and of the strength that comes from helping others carry their burdens. James, she said one snowy evening as she mended one of his shirts by the fireplace, may I ask what brought you to live so far from other people? James was quiet for so long that Eliza thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he spoke. I lost my family 5 years ago. My wife and young son died in a diphtheria outbreak in town. I came up here because being around people reminded me of everything I'd lost. Eliza set down her mending and looked at him with eyes full of understanding rather than pity. And now? Now I'm beginning to remember that isolation isn't the same as healing. As winter deepened, their conversations grew more personal. James shared memories of his wife Mary and son Samuel, while Eliza spoke of her hopes for her unborn child and her determination to build a meaningful life despite her losses. Eliza, James said one evening as they sat by the fire, I need to tell you something. When spring comes, you're welcome to stay. Not as hired help, but as family. Eliza looked up from the baby clothes she was knitting, her eyes bright with emotion. James, that's very kind, but I couldn't impose on your generosity indefinitely. It wouldn't be imposition. It would be partnership. James's voice carried a sincerity that surprised them both. You've taught me that running from pain doesn't heal it. You've shown me that grace isn't something we're born with, but something we choose to practice every day. The baby was born on a clear March morning, with James riding through melting snow to bring the doctor from town. Little Hope Carson came into the world with strong lungs and her mother's determined spirit. As James held the infant for the first time, Eliza watched his face transform with wonder and protective love. She's beautiful, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Just like her mother. 6 months later, as summer flowers bloomed around the cabin that had become a true home, James and Eliza were married in a simple ceremony attended by neighbors who had become dear friends. Hope gurgled happily in the arms of the local pastor's wife, already showing signs of the curiosity and grace she had inherited. Mrs. Whitmore, James said as they stood together on their porch, watching the sunset over the mountains, you came here to cook for me, but you ended up teaching me something much more valuable. What's that? Eliza asked, leaning against his shoulder. That grace isn't just something we receive. It's something we give, and in giving it, we discover who we're meant to be. Eliza smiled, understanding that sometimes the most desperate circumstances lead to the most unexpected blessings. She had come to the mountains seeking shelter for the winter, but she had found a home for a lifetime and a man whose heart had room for both her love and her child. The mountains that had once represented isolation for James now represented the solid foundation on which they had built their family, and the grace that Eliza had taught him to practice had become the cornerstone of their shared life.